What are the things to be thinking about when you've got the opportunity to work abroad? How do you find a place to live, set up utilities, set up bank accounts? How do you socialise somewhere where you might not just know anybody, but you might not even speak the language? That's what we're talking about in this week's episode. I'm Jeremy Klein, and this is Change Work Life. Hello and welcome to Change Work Life, the podcast where we're all about beating the Sunday evening blues and enjoying Mondays again. If you want to know how you can enjoy a more satisfying and fulfilling working life, you're in the right place. It's a big world out there, and the opportunity may present itself for you to relocate to another country for work. It's potentially very exciting, but you'd probably have lots of questions. How do you know where to live? How do you settle in? How do you set up bank accounts, utilities, internet, and so on? If you have a partner and children, what about them? Will your partner work? What are the school options? To help answer all these questions and more, I'm joined this week by Nathan Cornwell of Nathan Cornwell Consulting. Nathan is an organisational psychologist and consultant who works with expats and international teams, including helping those who might be crossing borders and switching workplaces. Nathan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. Looking forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
So how did you come to specialise in this area, this kind of like cross-border expat world?
Yeah, so there's a bit of a long version to this, and I'll try and tell you the quick version of it. But essentially, when I was about 22, I finished university with a kind of lack of an idea of what I wanted to do with my life. I know I'm not alone in that, but it's something that you kind of have to figure out yourself in some respects. I took the opportunity to go traveling. So I went backpacking in Australia and fell in love with the idea of traveling and kind of exploring new places, getting to see new and exciting things that I hadn't experienced before and being on the other side of the world to do it. So during that trip, I made a conscious decision to kind of find out other ways that I could start exploring and working in different countries. I think that was the idea, was to try and find opportunities to actually work and live in another country. So I studied psychology shortly after coming back from Australia as a master's. I was lucky enough to do it kind of long distance and have that opportunity. But I needed to pay for it and I needed the time to do it. So that actually took me out to South Korea, where I knew I could earn some money, kind of fulfill that ambition to live abroad and also kind of pay off the masters at the same time. So I jetted off to South Korea for just over a year. And I was teaching English out there, which is actually aligned with the bachelor's that I'd done. So it kind of made a little bit of sense, teaching English abroad. And it was one of the big jobs that sort of popped up when you typed into Google, what jobs can you do when you work abroad? So I kind of went for that. I didn't have much or very little teaching experience, to be honest. And it was kind of evident from the start that I wasn't entirely sure with what I was actually doing. I was just sort of standing in front of loads of kids that couldn't really understand what I was saying. It was a bit of an eye-opener. But gradually over time, I started to become a bit more competent at it. And I guess that comes with kind of practice experience. And then fast forward kind of later down the line, I actually moved to China for 6 years and did sort of a similar thing to begin with, but then made a transition into kind of the consultancy world. And that was when I was working with the British Chamber. We were kind of doing employability type workshops. It was at the same time a master's in psychology was coming to an end. And the thing with psychology is you need to kind of specialize in an area. So I chose organisational psychology to specialise in, which was kind of fully aligned with the work I've been doing with the British Chamber. And at that point, I was then looking for kind of opportunities within that sphere. And I found further opportunities to go to work and live in different other countries, consulting on different projects. And that's eventually taken me to the UAE, which is where I'm living and based now. So kind of retrospectively looking back, I had all these opportunities and experiences working and living abroad. And obviously I was developing this expertise in organisational psychology, which is all about making the workplace better for people. So kind of combining the two was where my consultancy seemed to fit. And that's when I decided to work on supporting expats to develop their workplace success. And that's what my organisation and consultancy does. It delivers expats with workplace success and also supports the organisations that's employing expats. So that's kind of the sort of long to shortish answer to that question, how I got here.
So when you're consulting with the individuals, what are the circumstances that give rise to the opportunities for them to move abroad?
Yeah, so there's kind of 4 stages to kind of the expatriation process and where I might come in to support expats on a one-to-one basis. So the first is the kind of preparation phase. They've either been assigned a role abroad or they're actively looking for a role abroad. So that's what I call kind of the preparation phase. The next phase is actually the onboarding phase. So once you get to that new country, you've got to onboard. And this is one of the more stressful periods. You've got so much learning to do, so much cultural adjustment to kind of deal with. And obviously at the same time, you're starting a new job. You might have family that have come with you. So there's a lot of aspects during that period which can be quite stressful. The next stage after that is kind of what I call the performing stage. So you've kind of onboarded and now you're ramping up. You're getting to a point where you want to be a high-performing employee in your organization. You're still going through a lot of these challenges. Challenges haven't necessarily gone away. You've had time to manage them. Now you're trying to work around different challenges. It's kind of a level up, if you like. And then the last point in time is a repatriation challenge. So that's when you're potentially coming back to your home country, and that can be one of the hardest parts. Speaking from personal experience, readjusting back to your own culture is a major challenge. It's often very much overlooked. So there's kind of 4 points to the expat journey, and I guess there's different explanations for why you might want to start off that first part. You can go 2 ways. You can either go with a company, which can be a company you've worked for some time. There's an opportunity abroad. They need you to move there. That can be one typical way of going abroad to work. The other way is, of course, the self-expatriated way. This is the way that I've done quite a few times, is kind of found a job myself, then been expatriated over there to work. And then you kind of, there's challenges to both sides, but certainly you're on your own a little bit in some respects because you're there to kind of acculturate as best as possible, but without that support package around you, unless the HR of the organization's got it nailed down. But sometimes they don't really have it nailed down. I think that's kind of the service I'm trying to offer in some respects. So yeah, it's kind of either you're self-expatriating or going with a company, and then you've got these 4 stages to kind of proceed through. So when I come to services, is at one of these stages.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll certainly be interested in diving into those 4 stages. But before we get to that, the repatriation, I mean, is it fairly typical when this situation arises that someone is going with a view to returning at some point? It's a temporary move.
It's a great question, and I'm not sure everybody knows the answer. For instance, when I moved abroad to China, for instance, I went there. The plan was to go there for 1 year, come back, and it was about 6 or 7 years that I spent, and that was never the plan, right? So I guess even coming back, I didn't know at that time if I was going to come back, because I sort of formed this really settled life out there and quite enjoyed it. It was only during the pandemic when things became a little bit more extreme, and that opportunity to come back, even just to visit, wasn't there. And that kind of forced a lot of expats to repatriate, or at least look at different places to move to. So it's a difficult one, because for many people, I'm sure they're not sure exactly how long they'll go out there for. With a kind of organisational expatriation, so where you're going with an organisation, that's a bit more arranged. That's a bit more, in certain circumstances, a bit more of a kind of lifespan to it. So you go out there for 2 years, it might be a two-year contract, and then the idea is that you're repatriating back into the business. But certainly if you go there by yourself, it can be a different arrangement. I've met a lot of people along in my experience as well, some of those that have found wives or husbands in the new country, so they've ended up settling there without that intention originally. And I've also known them to kind of bring their wives or husbands back to their own country, which I'm sure was never necessarily on the cards. I think that's just the luck of life. Sometimes it can throw up anything at you. So just trying to predict it can be difficult unless you've got some certain criteria, such as a contract, or you've got certain kind of life goals that you want to achieve that take you back home, and that you're just going there for a short stint. So I'm not sure if I answered your question in a black and white way, but I tried to sort of shade over it with some grey.
No, that's really interesting. And I suppose where it's like a fixed corporate assignment and you're expecting it to last no more than 2 or 3 years, how important is it to have in mind, maybe when you're even starting out, what happens when the opportunity comes to an end? So what happens at the end of that 2 or 3 year period?
Yeah, I think that's a really important aspect to really consider before you move abroad, because especially as you start preparing, you're preparing to go to that new culture, but actually knowing what's going to happen when it finishes is also important. And I think organizations, as I say, have got this nailed down quite well in terms of just providing a bit of a vision to the individual expatriating what that looks like. But I think there's a lot of organizations that certainly haven't kind of considered the repatriation phase as much as they should be doing. So that often can have a negative impact on the individual, especially as they start to get a bit closer to that end point. You know, what kind of are they thinking? Will my job be available when I come back? And how, you know, the logistical aspects of moving your things back. Then, of course, you've found and made friends in that new culture. So having to sort of give them up is also hard work. It's almost like when you're expatriating itself, it's a difficult process. You know, you're leaving your friends and the familiar circumstances behind, and it's a big change. So that's what organizations really need to do as much as possible to kind of support their expat employees to kind of deal with that change as much as possible, and be able to sort of navigate the uncertainty around it. You know, providing a kind of plan of re-onboarding, if you like, when they come back to their organization. Also setting up their organization for the right circumstances, you know, getting the employees that are in that home office to embrace and understand that this expat's coming back. I'm not saying a royal welcome, but just, you know, kind of being on board with the idea that they've gone abroad and acquired new skills and knowledge, and they'll be keen to kind of use this when they come back to the organization. So kind of giving them opportunity to use these skills and knowledge. I think on that point, you know, careers are a big source of anxiety for people repatriating. And I did some research around this. You know, it's about that, not understanding what it's going to be like when you come back, not having your knowledge and skills appreciated. And sometimes maybe you're almost degraded because you've spent time outside the country, you haven't been on the floor in that home country office. So you're kind of almost having to reacquire the knowledge that you might have had before you left. So again, the organization needs to support that as much as possible to kind of take away those concerns of.
And I guess there's things that individuals can do as well. So if they know that it's going to be, say, a 2-year assignment, then they can make sure that they continually touch base with wherever they're going to be going back to. So I don't know, even if it's just picking up the phone and speaking to people every so often, or just sending an email, making sure that they're aware that you're still there, you're still part of the team, and you're coming back, and keeping up with what's going on that way. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's crucial. I mean, there's that saying that goes kind of out of sight, out of mind. And I think that does happen when you move away. Kind of even your friends and family kind of, you feels like they've forgotten about you. Of course, you're still in their mind, but because you're not there every day like you perhaps were before, you're not necessarily in the loop all the time. I think, you know, from a social point of view, maybe with your colleagues at the same time, you know, when you do come back, you kind of sort of trying to pick up the office anecdotes, or, you know, what are the topics being spoken about. You know, it's quite a hard and disjointed feeling when you've been out the loop for a little while. It's like joining a conversation midway through. You're trying to sort of pick up what people are talking about, and so that's why it is important to make sure that you're constantly in contact with those back home, either in the workplace or with your friends and family, just to make sure that you haven't been forgotten about. And there's almost an expectation that you're the one that reaches out to them. I think that's what I've learned, is that there's an onus on you as the expat. You're the one that's left. You're the one that's gone away. You need to be the one that makes the effort. And I think for the expat, it's almost like the other perspective. You know, they're kind of like, why is nobody contacting me? Have they forgotten about me? You kind of start feeling a bit sorry for yourself. But I think from an unselfish point of view, you have to sort of start reaching out to them. That's the expectation. So I think that's important. I think the other thing is obviously having those opportunities to fly back home. Going back to the example I used earlier, when I was in China during the pandemic, we weren't able to leave. And I think that caused a lot of stress for expats out there. Just not having the option, missing out on things like weddings or birthdays or, big events that they needed to attend. That really disconnected a lot of expats. And eventually that was the straw that broke the camel's back for a lot of them. They had to repatriate. So just having these opportunities to fly back, and maybe the organisation, I don't know, provides expats a few more holidays to be able to do that. I'm not saying that should be kind of the answer to it, but just giving them the ability to come back a bit more frequently can help them, not just personally, but also in their careers, just staying in the loop with what's happening in the home office about, the market that really supports them. So that's what I'd say for that one.
Let's dig in a little bit more into the preparation, and I thought we might bring out my favourite avatar family that I've used a few times on the podcast before. So we've got Tom, who's a lawyer in his late 30s, his wife Suzanne, and they've got a young daughter, Julia. And I think her age might change as we talk about the different scenarios, so what sort of childcare provision they might be looking for when they move. We're helping them with the things that they might need to figure out. So Tom's got an opportunity to go to another office of his law firm in a different country, and maybe it's a fixed 2-year assignment. Now, you've rather helpfully got an acronym of the preparation things to think about. So I'd love it if we could maybe go through that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I was kind of looking at the research into expat challenges and came up with this acronym which spells out the word FLAIR. And the idea is that if you kind of accomplish all of these challenges or overcome them, then you can expatriate with FLAIR. So just going through them one by one, if we start with the F. The F is around finances. So obviously there's a lot of financial implications to moving abroad. You've got things like tax to deal with. You've also got a need to have some kind of budget. If your company's not providing it, you need a budget to be able to, afford the apartment or house that you're going to get when you move abroad. So that's really important, is kind of taking care of your finances when you do move. The other aspect is the L, and the L stands for logistics. So logistics can be anything from kind of moving and packing your boxes through to kind of sorting out the house when you get abroad. So it's kind of that aspect around kind of just setting up things physically and making sure that everything's in order in that sense. The next one is A, and A I've called acquisition. And that's kind of, we talked about the onboarding part before, and it's a really big part of the expatriation process and quite a stressful one. You're having to learn so much in such a short space of time, whether it's the culture, adjusting to the new culture, whether it's things in the new job, the new role, the organization, the language in a lot of respects as well. I remember when I first arrived in China, not being able to order any food because everything was in the local language, right, in Chinese. So it became very, very challenging. So trying to overcome a lot of these sort of learning acquisition aspects is problematic. But if you can, then that's full credit to your experience. The I is the inner emotions. So of course, this is going to be a stressful period as much as it is exciting. Some of this comes down to personality. So again, in the research, they've shown that certain personalities are sort of better equipped for this expatriation experience. Without going too much into the detail, we've got a personality trait called openness. So that's someone who's very curious about the world, wanting to experience new things, and quite innovative as well in that nature. Versus someone at the other end of the scale who are a little bit, they like kind of their own ways. They know what they like. They like kind of being comfortable in their own habits and a little bit rigid, but not in a negative sense, just at the other end of the scale, I would say. So obviously, if you look at this personality trait, the ones that are a bit more open, a bit more curious, going to enjoy that experience probably a little bit more, maybe adapt a little bit better. Having said that, there's peaks and troughs to kind of some of these personality scales. So it's not to say anybody that doesn't like that, then they're not going to work out. But I guess you also think people at the high openness end are the ones that are going to be looking for these opportunities in the first place. But yeah, there's personality aspects that can help with that. And then just sort of finding strategies to control those inner emotions are going to be really helpful in getting you over the line in terms of onboarding. And then the last one is around roles and relationships. So it's kind of two things roll up into one. In terms of the role, you have to have a clear understanding of what that role is. And sometimes what you'll find is the job description doesn't always match what the job is on the ground. I know that's true of any job, but certainly once you've made a commitment to move abroad, it's harder just to move back when you find out that the jobs are completely different, especially if you brought all your family with you as well. So kind of understanding the role as much as possible is going to really help you understanding who the relationships are, which is that second part. So relationships meaning things like your colleagues, who your managers are. Maybe you're working in a multicultural environment now. You've got to try and work on how you navigate different relationships with different cultures and how you communicate effectively. But also your family back home, again, to the previous question, how do you kind of keep in contact with them and your friends? So kind of overcoming all of these aspects are what's going to really help you to get that expatriation success when you go abroad.
Okay. No, thank you for setting that out. There's no way we're going to be able to go through every aspect of each letter, but maybe let's touch on a few which might leap out to people. So on the finance side, you mentioned relocation, and say this is an internal company relocation. Tom has been asked to go to another office and work there for 2 years. What are some of the things that Tom can ask for as part of the relocation package? What are the kinds of things that could be on the menu?
Yeah, I mean, there's various things. Again, it depends on the company, right? And the sort of size of the budget they have, what they're willing to do. And that really weighs in on the success of the expatriation process a little bit as well. But, if you're a global company, there might be more perks to support expats moving abroad. So, yeah, a couple of the ones, obviously getting flights covered is important to fly out somewhere. That's not true of all contracts. I've certainly seen contracts where you're expected to pay your own flights. In addition to that, you've got the things that you're moving with. So, especially if you've been in a stable home that you've got lots of stuff and you want to kind of just pick that up and move it to another country, then you have to kind of negotiate with the company whether they're going to be able to pay for all of them boxes. Because the other end is they're going to have to bring it back at some point, potentially anyway. So that's probably something that weighs on their mind when they're calculating the finances. So how much stuff can you bring aboard? What are the important things to take? In addition to that, you've got things that could cover like medical insurance. I mean, that's very key. I think a lot of packages look at providing medical insurance. I think that's also maybe by employment law that they have to provide some of that. So just making sure you've got some of these insurances covered. I know some companies that provide pets support. So bringing your pets to another country is something that can happen. I know I haven't got many pets myself, but I know a lot of people can't bear to live without, their dogs or cats. So that can almost be a deal breaker for a lot of people. So making sure that that's an option is something that companies could look to do. And maybe that's what Tom in this situation could try to negotiate. The other ones could be potentially around school fees. I know that we've talked about his daughter, Julia. School fees abroad can be quite expensive, especially a lot of these international schools. So I don't know how much a company would be willing to pay or cover the school fees, but if there's any support for that, that's something, again, that should be considered. And maybe that's where you start thinking about the salary that you're getting when you move abroad, because that's going to, if they're not providing support in that, then it's going to come out of your salary. So kind of negotiating those type of aspects. And then maybe any travel that occurs, obviously, in the new country, which also could be kind of bonuses to travel to different countries. I know some companies provide kind of certain airfares to different countries that can either be helpful for coming back to your home country if you're making a home visit, or just, if you're going on holiday somewhere. I know in the UK, sometimes if we move out to Asia, it's kind of quite an interesting move, because you've got all these Asian countries you've never necessarily had the opportunity to visit before. Now they're on your doorstep. So you're kind of quite keen to go and explore all of these different countries. So maybe that's another kind of perk that could be introduced. I don't know if I've covered everything that you can think of. If there's any others, let me know. And see if I've had any contracts with that.
The other one you've mentioned, which I definitely don't want to dwell on, but okay, I thought could be worth bearing in mind is tax. My experience is that no matter how simple your circumstances are, once you start introducing two countries into the equation, so maybe you're still, maybe Tom is still tax resident in the UK, and also he ends up being tax resident for 2 years in another country, that it can get really tricky figuring out where you're supposed to file returns, on what you're supposed to pay tax, and where. I mean, is it as complicated as I think it is? And what can Tom do to get on top of that and also not end up spending a fortune in professional fees for a simple situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't myself had any sort of bad experiences in terms of tax, having to get double taxed or anything like that. I think there are professional advisors out there, and I think some of them are not as expensive as maybe we would think. So kind of reaching out to them obviously would be a good place to kind of start. I think it's sometimes just better to be safe than sorry. And I think if you start that process early, I think even reaching out to them before you move abroad could be a good point to kind of work out, what's the cost benefit to actually going abroad, and what do I need to look out for? I think, certainly if you're planning to come back to the UK quite regularly, that's a concern that you need to kind of think about, because I think if you spend so many days in the UK per year, that kind of puts you in this bracket of potentially getting double tax. So just getting clear on all of these aspects is quite important as early as possible before you make the move. If you make the move, then you're trying to work it from there, it can be a bit more tricky. But yeah, I guess, tax, I think just on this point, I think, transferring money, for instance, can be complicated for certain countries. I know when I was in China, it was a bit of a hassle. You had to go to the bank, you had to provide lots of identity, you had to show that you're paying tax in that country. You had all these forms that were in Chinese again, so kind of trying to negotiate with a bank teller that only really spoke Chinese made this process quite drawn out. So it was always kind of a joke between the expats, I've got to go to the bank today, and it's going to be a good 4 hours I'm going to spend in there just trying to transfer a bit of money back. So obviously, yeah, depending on the countries that you go to, that's also a consideration, is just, how are you going to transfer money back? What's your plan for that? I know some companies that actually pay in UK sterling for certain employees. That obviously depends on the contracts they've got, the situation they're in, but that might also deal with that tax element as well. I'm not sure the ins and outs of that, but that's something that is certainly worth considering.
And you touched on another aspect there, which is bureaucracy. So just opening bank accounts, setting up utilities, getting internet. I know that some countries are more bureaucratic than others, but do you have any kind of general tips just for getting that kind of stuff, which seems like it should be basic, but isn't always that basic, getting all that set up?
Yeah, it's part of the merry-go-round of expat life. It's one of the things that you encounter quite early on, because you're trying to set everything up at once, and things are not quite as straightforward as you might expect. So you kind of sort of have to be a little bit resilient and patient with the process. But in terms of getting things kind of sped up, or at least getting things as smooth as possible, again, that relies on, having somebody that's local, or at least very knowledgeable of that market to kind of take you through that process. An example, sort of in the UAE, you have to get what's called an Emirates ID card, and you can only then rent somewhere to live once you've got that card. So it's a little bit of a waiting game, because you have to patiently wait for it until you can actually find somewhere to live. And obviously you want to get somewhere to live pretty quickly so that you can get set up and get working and get sort of adjusting as quickly as possible. So it's a little bit frustrating, some of these things are just a waiting game. But I think once you've got a good sort of HR advisor, or at least somebody that's there from the company to help you, then that's pretty good, kind of in terms of support. Trying to do this kind of stuff yourself is really difficult, I will admit. Obviously, yeah, depending on the culture that you've gone to, but I would always advise getting someone to support you, because I've tried that as well, that route as well, but it takes a lot longer and it frustrates you even more. So trying to make your life as easy as possible early on is a good thing to do.
And finding somewhere to live, I mean, that's another key aspect, especially here where we've got Tom, Suzanne and Julia, so they're a family unit. And I mean, I guess unless they have the opportunity to fly out and start looking around a few properties before like the big move, then so assuming that a company doesn't already have something lined up, some kind of a corporate let, I mean, how do they figure out where to live? I mean, what's a good area in the city they're moving to? What's a bad area? What's a fair price for properties? What's something that's going to suit them?
Yeah, that's another excellent question. It's my experience kind of leans into the fact that it's a bit of an experiment when you're first arriving in another country. I think that the advice I'd give is obviously try and ask as many people as possible on suggestions. That can be overwhelming in itself because everyone's kind of got their own biases about where you should live. But generally speaking, they'll give you good advice on kind of what to look out for, what not to look out for. So speaking to as many people as possible will be really helpful. I think in terms of, directly speaking with HR, sometimes they're helpful. They might even have an agent that's attached to their company that they can send you to. But that's also a little bit of a danger because if you've only got one agent and they sometimes know how much you're earning, they know your salary, they're going to sort of ramp up the price of the rent to kind of match that. So you have to be a little bit careful with HRs that are just proposing one agent. And I guess doing a little bit of market research, getting a feel for different houses, different prices, and you start to get an understanding of the market. It's quite difficult when you obviously first arrive because, as I say, you're trying to get somewhere pretty quickly so you can start adjusting as much as possible. But if you can be a little bit more patient, you can then sort of get a feel for what the market price is, get a feel for what are the things that you like and don't like. And then at that time, you've also had a bit of time to experience the city, see where some nicer areas are, some not so nice areas are. You also have to obviously take into account the commutes to work and how you're going to get there. If you're getting a car or taxi, trying to work that bit out. But it does take a little bit of time to experiment with some different places. I think when I was in Beijing, I lived there 6 years and I moved around quite consistently. I was trying to do short-term contracts, so that was kind of my answer to it. I was trying to find somewhere that would give you a shorter contract there. Where, that way, if something went wrong, I could easily sort of move. I was trying to buy myself a little bit more time. But yeah, with short-term contracts, you can pay a little bit more. Sometimes it reduces the kind of choices that you've got. So it is a challenge. But with a bit of patience, bit of time, you can find somewhere that's nice. You'll find the perfect one with persistence.
Let's talk about the family aspects. So Suzanne and Julia. So the move is motivated by Tom's work and that opportunity. We can come on to Suzanne in a sec. And obviously, if Julia is below school age, then Suzanne just could do the childcare. That would be an option. But let's say that she doesn't want to. So if we start with like preschool childcare, what might that look like in their situation?
Yeah, it can come in varying formats. I know obviously there's a lot of international schools that might be able to cover preschool age. So that's one route to sort of get your child into it, especially if Tom, I'm assuming, is from the UK. That might be the best initial option for him and his family to put his child into an international school. They're likely to speak English, for instance, or likely to follow kind of a UK curriculum at that point. If it's just something to kind of child mind, if you like, there are lots of other options. So, you've got private kind of nanny type care, daycare centres. You've got nannies themselves that can come to the house. I know a lot of people here, for example, have a private nanny that comes and sort of supports and looks after the child. So obviously that can be stressful for parents because they're looking for, a nanny that they can trust and go away to work and kind of feel secure in the knowledge that the nanny's looking after their child. And I've heard some stories of people, installing cameras all around their house just to make sure that the nanny's treating the baby okay or the child okay. But it can be a bit of an anxious period of time for parents. But I think, again, there's lots of options, especially at that age, and it's about exploring something that kind of makes sense, I would say, to the parents.
Okay. And if you're looking a bit older, let's say, Julia is 7, 8, 9, something like that, so school age. So you mentioned international schools. Presumably that's one possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. International schools is a good possibility. I think that's one of the most common ones that I'm aware of. I think I know a few people that managed to go or managed to send their child into a public system, which is a little bit more challenging because I think depending on the country that you're in, they're obviously teaching in a different language, and I think it's a good cultural experience for sure for your kid, but like at the same time, it's probably quite hard for them because everybody around you is speaking completely different languages. How do you integrate? And I know some kids might be good at sort of socializing and embracing that. But I know there might be other kids that will feel withdrawn, and obviously no parent wants to kind of cause that emotional upset to their children. So international schools tend to be kind of the way forward with that. That's where I see most parents sending their child.
And what about Suzanne? And as I say, this move has been motivated by Tom's job. It might be that she doesn't need to work, but on the other hand, especially if Julia is at school, she's got to find ways to fill her days. So, what might her options be?
Yeah, do you know, this is like one of the biggest challenges for the whole expatriation process. The spouse, either the husband or the wife, whoever is not actually sort of sponsored to do that move abroad, is the one that's kind of left with kind of having to change their career on behalf of the other half. And obviously, if they've got a child, maybe they're lumbered with kind of the childcare. Not that that's a bad thing, but maybe they're not used to that, and then having to sort of be a stay-at-home parent for the first time, it can be quite a shock. And obviously, at the same time, they're not having those opportunities to socialize as much, especially when they're first setting out. They're going to go and find their own friends, find opportunity to kind of get out there, get out of the house, have a reason to get out of the house. So I know the spouse contributes a lot to whether the expatriation process is successful. So organizations need to kind of look at that and see what they can do to provide support for the spouse, whether that's setting up a community, for example, that spouses can connect with them, or having events that obviously the spouse can come with the husband or wife too, that can get them integrated in society as much as possible, because that ultimately reduces the stress and the pressure on the individual that's been sponsored to expatriate, because they're going to face a lot of pressure themselves, right? They've upheaved their family essentially from a stable life to come and live in a different country, and they've got to make it work, And if you're facing all of these challenges in the workplace, and you've also coming home to kind of challenges, it's going to be really stressful. So finding ways to kind of support the spouse is really, really important. I think kind of for that spouse in terms of work, there's solutions to it. I think they can find a visa that suits them in terms of being able to find work themselves, and especially if they're very career motivated themselves, maybe that's what they want to do. They want to find a job or find something remote that they can start off with, and perhaps work from the UK and kind of deal with it that way. But it's kind of trying to prepare all that ahead of time and kind of anticipate it as much as possible. So yeah, different families face different challenges. So for Suzanne, it depends on her circumstances and how well she's able to kind of adapt. Yeah, that's what I say.
I'm going through my mind the film The Devil's Advocate, which I don't know whether you have ever seen that, with Keanu Reeves, Al Pacino and Charlize Theron, where it's not about going to another country, but it's about Keanu Reeves joining a law firm in New York, and Charlize Theron, who has been a high-powered real estate agent, is suddenly left not knowing what to do. And so she gets in with all the other, in this case, wives of the other lawyers, and basically they just kind of like spend their time shopping, and it drives her nearly crazy. So I guess that's the kind of thing that Suzanne's going to have a kind of a good think, and maybe get coaching herself on what's going to work for her so that she is also fulfilled. And as you say, I mean, it could be the other way around. It could be Suzanne's moving for the job and Tom's the one who needs the help, but whichever way it is.
Yeah, I think in the research I've done over the last few years, around careers, I think careers have become very central to our lives, in the sense that when we are introducing ourselves, we introduce ourselves by our career. It's almost part of our identity. So to go from having a career and then to not having anything can be quite emotionally traumatizing to that individual. And of course, you're wanting to find something to keep your inner drive going. So you might find yourself in a situation where that inner drive sort of burns out in a way. And that's, again, the danger of this expatriation process is you don't want that to happen to either you or the spouse, because that's when they'll start saying, let's go back home. So it's about sort of supporting them as much as possible. Having said all that, I do know there are wives and husbands that come out with their partner and really enjoy the time abroad. You know, they enjoy the free time that they've got to kind of experience new things. And there's certainly plenty of things going on, especially in some of these capital cities throughout the day. You've got yoga classes, you've got coffee meetups, shopping that can take place, and things in the evening, salsa dancing, sports. There's plenty of ways to kind of keep yourself busy at the same time, if that's what you're looking for. I guess that's ultimately what it is. It's kind of what your purpose is, what kind of period in life you are, and what you're looking to do.
Yeah, and I guess if you're moving somewhere where there is already a large expatriate community, then you're not going to be the only one. There's going to be lots of people around you from whom you can get support and ideas and friendships.
Yeah, absolutely. And jumping onto the social media platforms, that's a good way to kind of meet like-minded people. I've always thought, when it comes to meeting like-minded people, you kind of gravitate to people that are of your nationality. So for Brits, we're a little bit lucky in the sense that there's a lot of Brits abroad. So you can always go on Facebook, for example, and search Brits abroad, Abu Dhabi, for instance, and quite a few groups will pop up. And that's probably a good way to kind of find people that are in a similar boat to you. And again, having somebody that's in a similar boat to you is really important, because they're the ones that experience the same challenges and kind of empathize with you on those needs. And I guess, sort of the kind of work I do is based on that. I've lived this life abroad. And so when I come to speak to some of my clients, I can empathize, I can understand exactly what they mean when they're talking about some of these challenges, and we can gather strategies together on kind of how to overcome them. So it's about, finding like-minded people who have lived that life, who know what you're going through, and can kind of reason with you on what's happening. So it's important to find your kind of tribe in that sense.
Have you ever seen someone who's gone out for, say, a 2-year period, but who's made a concerted effort to go as native as they can? So learn the language, establish local friends, maybe even send their kids to a local school where they do teach in a different language.
Yeah, I've met quite a few people who have done that. Yeah, a good friend of mine, after his first year in Beijing, he moved down to kind of the south of China, where it was really kind of native in the sense that there weren't many expats there. And he had this ambition to really get fluent in his Chinese, and I think he accomplished that and sort of integrated with the culture quite well. You have to be very proactive. You have to be quite brave to do that. You have to be kind of confident and comfortable in yourself, to be able to go and kind of go off into the native country and be able to make friends and sort of deal with those awkward kind of situations that occur when you're sort of misaligned on cultures, not that they're awkward in a bad way, but it's not as natural, free-flowing as someone from your own culture. So I know a few people have done that. I know a family, when I was in Korea, their young one, I think he was about 3, they sent him to a preschool in Korea. So he couldn't speak English at that point, but he started learning sort of bilingually Korean and English, which was quite interesting, to see, because at dinner and he'd be sort of saying one word in English, one word in Korean, and it was quite interesting to kind of it was almost like an experiment in some way. And I think obviously the ambition of the parents was to get him speaking bilingual. I think that kind of helps him to grow and learn and be educated. I think when you're that age as well, you're quite naive to some of this stuff, so you probably don't experience it as stressfully as we would do as adults going forward. So I know a few people that have tried to go off the sort of expat trail and try to be a bit more native and try to make friends consciously with the locals as much as possible. My own sort of, in my own experience, I try to, I'm a bit middle of the ground in this sense that I don't just stick to the expats community, because I know people that do that, they come abroad and they're expecting everything to be like it was in their home country, whereas I'm a bit more willing to embrace, kind of the cultural norms of what's happening and kind of see it from that perspective. But I do enjoy, being with the expat community, because you can then have these conversations with somebody that you can empathize and understand and have a joke with, and they're the same TV shows that you've watched. They know the same football teams that you support. They kind of have had these experiences as well, these kind of cultural challenges, shall we say, of moving to that culture. You can see the cultural differences kind of combine and sort of laugh and joke about it. So I think, I've always taken the sort of middle of the ground approach, do a bit of both, integrate and also keep with your own expat community.
So we haven't had time to go through all aspects of your FLAIR acronym, but what I would like to know is, maybe in relation to anything that we haven't covered, what are maybe one or two of the most common mistakes that you see someone like Tom and his family make when they're moving for a job? Or perhaps what are one or two things that they really should do that quite a lot of times people don't do?
Yeah, the biggest one I think must be the preparation aspects, just taking that time to prepare, not just in the terms of like looking at, a culture book or a profile of that country book. It's a bit more about mental preparation and just how you're going to react to being in another country. And to a certain extent, sometimes you don't know how you're going to react until you actually get out there. So a lot of senior leaders, for example, they're often chosen based on the skills that they have. They've performed very well in the companies that they're in, but that's been within their own culture. You take that person, you put them in another country, they've got all these stressful aspects that are churning through them. They're not going to perform as well all the time anyway. So, it's a bit of a struggle with certain individuals. So that preparation phase is really key, and just trying to anticipate what are some challenges I might face. What have I done previously that's been a challenge? Have I been on holiday, for instance, and sort of found like the food in the hotel was not quite up to what I was expecting? How can I then navigate around that challenge? Do I need to pack some other ingredients or some other foods? What am I going to miss as well when I go abroad? The other thing was, kind of financially, I think you have to be in a good sort of stable position going abroad as well. I think when I went to China, I wasn't necessarily in that position because I was paying off this master's, and I kind of went out there thinking, wow, I start earning some money pretty quickly, and then I'll be able to kind of pay for everything and sort of live a normal life. However, when I did get out there, I didn't expect the 5 months of rent that I needed to pay up front with an extra month of agency fee. So you're almost putting 6 months of rent away in kind of your first month. And had I known that previously, I would have saved up a little bit more and then not had to sort of live hand to mouth for a few weeks while I waited for my first salary package. So kind of the preparation phase is a big one. I think the other one is relationships. Relationships are key to life anyway, right? Key to the happiness of life and being fulfilled. So just maintaining those relationships you've got back home, maintaining the friendships that you've got as best as possible, but also being willing to kind of obviously meet new people. I mean, that's one of the reasons you go out abroad, is to meet new people, meet people from different cultures, and just being willing to kind of embrace that as much as possible is something that a family needs to embrace, especially if they're moving just the three of them. They need to find social connections, find things that are outside of work. Also, for the person that's been sponsored to move out there, get along with your colleagues, try to find out as much as possible about them, try to understand their cultures, where they've come from, what brought them to that country. If you're working with other expats, what are their motivations, what are their communication styles? There's so many things that you have to try to sort of navigate through, but doing as much as possible and being as proactive as possible is really important. Yeah, one of my favorite books is by Stephen Covey, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and rule number 1 is about being proactive. And I think I try to live by that mantra, especially moving abroad, is being proactive about relationships, trying to meet as many people as possible. So those are the 2 key ones that I can think of. I think the other one, this is a slightly philosophical one, but in the sense that you try to learn as much as you can from the experience, because you only live once, without sounding pessimistic, but having these opportunities to move abroad and get to see how life is through different lenses is really something not everybody experiences, because everyone is kind of used to being and living in their own country, that they never get that opportunity to kind of see what it's like to live in a different way. And I know you can go on holiday to countries and experience it like that for a couple of weeks, but it's not the same as living somewhere, having to really culturally adapt to a different place. So just appreciating that as much as possible and learning from that about yourself and also about kind of the way you want to live going ahead. I think it's really important and can put you in good stead going forward.
So you mentioned the Stephen Covey book. Are there any other resources that people could check out if they want to find out more about any aspect of what we've talked about?
Well, one big one is one resource I really like is called The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. So that's a book. I read it several years ago, and it's based on some research around kind of culture and cultural differences. And it really sort of plans out these different constructs of culture on 8 different continuums and kind of measures out how different countries land on these continuums. So it might be communication style, for example, where the Brits land in comparison to the US, in comparison to those in China. And it kind of explained a lot of these issues you have when you're moving abroad and you're trying to communicate in a multicultural team. Like, how do you sort of talk on the same page, and how is everybody sort of getting misaligned with what they're saying? And it kind of explains how to go about sort of adapting the way you communicate to kind of solve some of these issues. And it talks about various different things. And I just think it's a really cool book in terms of understanding cultures and how they're different. And especially if you've lived and been somewhere else, you can really sort of, it starts making sense, a lot of the things that you play back in your mind. So that's why I really enjoy reading that book. The other one, not to give too many extra resources, but the other one is the High Performance Podcast. I started listening to that during the pandemic, and it was a huge kind of confidence builder. I just enjoyed kind of learning about what high performance meant for other people, for celebrities, for sports people, and what could I take from that to apply to my own life to kind of help me at work, in the workplace. I often feel like we're sometimes sports people trying to perform as best as possible to kind of drive the company forward. So I think that's kind of something I really took away from that podcast. So they're 2 big ones. I'll leave you with 2, and hopefully you'll enjoy them.
Where would you like to send people if they want to find you?
Yeah, sure. So if you want to find out a little bit more about what I do, I've got my LinkedIn page, so you can follow me at Nathan Cornwell. I've also got my website, which is nathancornwellconsulting.com, and you can find out a bit more about the services I offer, and also a little bit more about me. And feel free to take my email off that website, which is nathan@nathancornwellconsulting.com. If you want to reach out, send me a message. I'm more than happy to have a conversation. I'm always doing research about expats, so if there's any expats out there that want to get in touch and help me to understand more about what it's like to be an expat and what are the challenges they face, then I'd really like to hear from you. So that'd be the best way to reach out.
Awesome. Well, Nathan, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge.
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate it and really enjoyed the conversation, Jeremy. So look forward to continuing.
Okay, hope you enjoyed that interview with Nathan Cornwell. What was clear from the conversation with Nathan is that there's a lot to think about, and we probably tend to focus on particular things at the expense of others. I know that my mind would probably immediately turn to some of the very practical things like opening bank accounts and setting up utilities and that kind of thing. And I probably wouldn't think all that much necessarily about, say, social life until later on in the journey. But I also like the fact that Nathan highlighted the importance of openness and curiosity. There's that word again, curiosity. I think that's my word of the year. For this kind of experience to work, you've got to be open to possibility and willing to try things out. Sure, there's lots to organise. Sure, there are lots of things to do. But by getting out there and having a go rather than worrying about what to do, that's going to be the way to make this enjoyable and successful. Show notes, as usual, are on the website at changewhatlife.com/191. That's changewhatlife.com/191. And we're into the 190s, which means episode 200 is not that far away. And I'd really like to design episode 200 with your help. So tell me, what ways do you think that I should mark the occasion of 200 episodes? I'd love to have your ideas, so drop me a line using the contact form on the website, changewhatlife.com/content. Or if you're subscribed to my email list, you can always just reply to one of those emails. Let me know, what are your ideas for me to celebrate reaching 200 episodes? In the meantime, we've got a really interesting episode coming up for you in 2 weeks' time. Earlier this year, I did a course all around neurodiversity in coaching, which made me realise just how little I know about neurodiversity, and so that's the subject we're going to be exploring in 2 weeks' time. If you work anywhere with more than 20 people, then there is a very good chance that at least one of your number has some kind of neurodiversity. So the next episode is going to be very informative and I think very practical. So make sure you have subscribed to the podcast so you don't miss it, and I can't wait to see you then. Cheers. Bye.